Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of MAP Forum. I'm Nagar Rokar, and I have the pleasure of hosting the weekly webinars for the Medici Archive Project. Today, we have one of our senior research scholars at the Medici Archive Project, Dr. Marcello Simonetta, who has generously accepted our invitation to give a talk on the most recent discoveries at the archives. He is also the director of the Arte del Negozio at the Medici Archive Project. So majority of you probably watched his roundtables. And he also has been part of the national edition of Machiavelli's letters. And tonight he's going to give a talk on some of his discoveries related to this topic. Marcello Simonetta, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and
Thank
an
you.
honor.
Can you turn on your video too, please?
There we
Perfect.
go.
Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful. Great to see you.
Great to see you.
It's an honor to have you.
Usual. Thank you. And I will try to share my screen right away so that everybody can follow.
Beautiful.
Okay. So I guess we can start right away. It's a topic that I find particularly timely. And as you'll see, well, first of all, today is the 10th of December, and it so happens that the most famous letter that Machiavelli ever wrote was written on this very day, exactly 511 years ago, to the day. And it's a letter that has been, probably read by most of the people that are in this seminar tonight, but I think is worth quoting it. It's the only letter in which Machiavelli talks about his book, The Prince, and he describes his daily routine when he is in his little country home outside of Florence, and he spends it in silly activities. And then when evening comes, I return home, he writes, and I enter into my study, and at the door I take off my everyday dress, full of mud and of clay, and I put on regal and courtly clothes, and decently dressed I enter into the ancient courts of ancient men, where, received lovingly by them, I eat the food that is mine alone, and for which I was born. There I'm not ashamed to speak with them and to ask them the reasons for their actions, and they in their humanity answer me. And for 4 hours at a time I feel no boredom. I forget all trouble, I do not fear poverty, death does not frighten me. I enter the company entirely, and because Dante says, what has been learned does not become knowledge unless it is retained, I have noted down what capital I have earned in my conversation with them, and composed a small work on principalities, in which I immerse myself as much as I can in the cogitations concerning this subject, discussing what a principality is, what kind they are, how they are acquired, how they are maintained, why they're lost. And the letter goes on, and this is from translation by Bill Connell. And the reason I bring this up, not just the anniversary, but the fact that the recipient of this letter is half, I would say, of the subject, if not 2/3 of the subject of tonight's talk. So Francesco Vettori. Francesco Vettori, we'll hear a lot about him tonight. And I will already refer to 2 books in which he is talked about a lot. One happens to be a book written by John and Jamie. It was, I think, republished by Princeton University Press quite recently. It came out quite a few years ago. and it's a study of the letters exchanged between Machiavelli and Vettori in the crucial years between 1513 and 1515, out of which the one that I just read out to you. And fundamental idea is that the prince came out of a dialogue between Machiavelli and Vettori. And the other book happens to be by myself. It's not self-congratulatory. It's just the fact that in that I collected portraits of the men, all Machiavelli's men. The book is not translated into English, unfortunately. And the first two chapters are dedicated to Francesco and to his brother Paolo, whom you'll meet very soon. As Nagar mentioned, I was also involved in the national edition of Machiavelli's letters. This is one of the 3 hefty volumes. As you can see, it was a pretty big job. And just giving you numbers here, Machiavelli's letters to Vettori are the largest number ever written to, that has come to us, of course, to a private individual, of course, excluding the official letters. And in return, 23 letters by Vettori have come down to us, and then at least one to his brother Paolo. And so the two brothers like to say this by my father, who unfortunately left us a couple of months ago. So for me, it's an honor and a duty to remember this. So who were these two brothers, and why am I so interested in them? Well, because they were really the biggest players behind the scenes in Machiavelli's time, and specifically in relationship to him. One summer ago, in the middle of summer 2023, I went to a place in the middle of Piemonte, of all Italian regions, and I found myself in front of this. This is the Archivio Vettori. I could tell you the whole story behind it. I'll make it short. The Archivio should not have been in Piemonte. It was in Rome before, and before then was in Florence. And because of complicated reasons, including World War II, all these papers were moved to this villa in the middle of the Pianura Padana in Piemonte. As you can see, it's a very rich archive, and each of the volumes bears the family coat of arms. On the right, you see the one in the Archivio Vettori. On the left, you see a painted version, which I recently found in a private archive here in Florence. So it's a noble family. They're definitely optimates. And I won't tell you the whole list of the people who had official honors in the Florentine government. This is just the beginning of a 2-page long list of this kind of honors. And I will focus tonight on one specific volume that is in this archive, because as you'll see, it has a lot of relevance in terms of understanding Machiavelli's times and in the context in which he lived. So from this point on, I am afraid to announce that most quotations will be in Italian, because the documents are, of course, in Italian, but even in Latin. But I will make sure I paraphrase the most important items within the quotes. But I want also people to be able to appreciate the original language. So as you can see, this volume contains letters among the Vettori family members from 1508 to 1530, a very dramatic and intense moment of Florentine history. And this is I'm going to skip this, but just to give you a sense, this is what the archive looked like sometime in the 18th century. We have a description that tells us that many more volumes existed in the archive, and they're not there anymore. Just to give you a sense of the dispersion of these documents, this is a quick list of selected items. There was a big auction of documents in London in 1833. And about 400 letters. Auction belonged originally to the Vettori family. And all these items in red are, at least up to almost the end, are letters that we simply don't know where they ended up. They're probably sitting in some private archive, God knows where. It could be anywhere really in the world. And I wish we knew. Maybe we'll find out one day or another where they are. The last two, however, are two original letters written by Vettori to Machiavelli. They were known until very recently only through their copies here in Florence, and incomplete copies, I should add, and also undeciphered copies. And I was lucky enough a few years ago to find them in the British Library, in that collection that you see quoted here. And they were first published in a book of mine called Volpi e Leoni, Foxes and Lions, and eventually now in the edition that I just mentioned. So we're beginning to put all these pieces of this exploded puzzle together. This is a list of other documents that somehow have made their way back into the Archivio di Stato in Florence. They mostly belong to a part of the archive called Acquisti e Doni, purchases and gifts. And over the course of a couple of centuries, for various reasons and from different provenances, these volumes were either bought or gifted back to Florence. And they contain, as you can see, a lot of correspondence related to the Vettori family. So this is to show you that the family had sold out many of their treasures. Just to give an example, these are 4 letters written by Cardinal Bernardo Bibbiena to Vettori in the year 1518, and they are in 3 different places. 2 of them are in the hands of an antiquarian in Switzerland. One is part of that collection in the British Library, and another one is in one of those volumes I just mentioned, the Acquisti e Doni. As you can see, they are randomly dispersed. So now let's go back to the Tomo 51 that I want to tell you about, because this is the first time that an English audience hears about them. So what happens is that the family sold many bits of their treasures, but they held on to this single volume simply because it contained correspondence that was only between family members. And it's spread around this volume in the way you see. I'm not going to read all these numbers, but you can see that the biggest chunk is made out of letters written by Francesco Vettori to his brother Paolo. And then there are interchanges between other brothers, Francesco's wife, and as we'll see, a very important letter written by Francesco to his nephew, son of his brother. and many others. Now I'm gonna just give you some highlights of these documents that nobody has ever seen, and I'm quite excited to present to you. So first of all, a little bit of background, biographical background. During the summer of 1507, Francesco Vettori was chosen. He was fairly young. He was born in 1474. He was chosen as the Florentine ambassador to the Emperor Maximilian I. In fact, at first, Machiavelli himself had been chosen for this mission, and then for some internal disagreements, they preferred this younger and less experienced at that point nobleman, although this was the Florentine Republic. And so Vettori was sent alone to the emperor. It was a very tense moment when the emperor was threatening to invade Italy, so Florence wanted to be on his good side. After about 6 months of this mission, Vettori sort of raised his hands and said, "I can't really do this by myself. Please send some help." So Machiavelli was sent with a delay of about 6 months to help Vettori. And at first, you can tell that Machiavelli was not particularly friendly to Francesco Vettori, but Francesco was a very endearing man, very meek in character, although extremely sharp in wit. In fact, during his stay, he also wrote a little booklet called Viaggio in Alemagna, his travel to Germany, which is a delightful book. I recommend it to Italian readers. It's translated into French as well, but not into English. And it's actually a collection of very salacious novellas, which has very much a sort of a Machiavellian flavor. It even contains a small and a sexy comedy. If we have time, I can get into that as well, but this is not the topic of tonight's talk. So everybody assumed that Vettori and Machiavelli had returned together from this mission in June of 1508. There's many letters, official letters, they're all published, written by both of them. In fact, often Machiavelli would write them and have Vettori, the ambassador, sign them. I was just watching on Netflix a few minutes ago, to stay awake at this late night, a series called The Diplomat. And I was thinking to myself that the content of this series reminded me very much of many of the things that these people were dealing with. Betrayals, backstabbing, conspiracies, avoiding or provoking wars, and so on. So this was their job. This is what they were doing at the time. Anyway, so what we didn't know until I started digging into these documents is that, in fact, Vettori stayed longer than Machiavelli. And the proof is in these two letters. Vettori had used Machiavelli as a sort of messenger to Florence. Machiavelli returned and was hoping to return to Florence, but the government kept saying no to him. They wouldn't give him the licenza. So he stayed there longer, and hopefully he would return soon, but it took him another year almost to be back. So these are just two of the letters he wrote when he was in Flanders, because at that point the emperor had moved there. These are not very important mentions, if not for the fact that Machiavelli was there. This is a letter that was partially ciphered, and it tells us this is a private letter that Vettori writes to his brother Paolo, and it's a very interesting letter because it shows the level of uncomfortable sort of status in which he found himself, because it was so far from Florence that he wouldn't get money to live on, and he was the Florentine ambassador, so he would have to rely on sort of local sponsors, Florentines who were merchants or bankers who would basically pay for his expenses, and then he would feel indebted to them, and that would basically put him at unease for his job, because his job was official, but the money was private. And this is the way the letter looks like in the original. I'm not going to get into the coding and decoding. I just run a little a seminar for the Arte del Negozio on this, and I will skip all this part. But as you can see, this takes a little bit of thinking to break it. Anyway, I broke with the help of my friend George and Norbert this cipher. And this is another one. Interesting enough, this letter chooses to adopts a different cipher, and this was the cipher, sort of the internal cipher of the Florentine Chancery. And but the letter again is not particularly interesting unless you're interested in mercantile history, because this was about Giovanni's sort of the third brother, the younger brother, who was very much into money making and mercantile enterprises. But since these were sensitive information, they were hidden under the cipher. Now let's jump ahead into the really juicy stuff. As you probably all remember, in February 1513, Machiavelli was involved, accused of being part of a conspiracy against the Medici. And at the same time, Pope Julius II died. And immediately after, the Pope that was elected in Rome was none other than Giovanni de Medici, the second born of Florence the Magnificent, and he became Pope Leo X. It was a huge event because he was the very first Florentine Pope in history, and he was a very young man, and he was a member of the Medici family. So as a result, the city literally went crazy out of joy, and they started partying like mad, and they also emptied the prisons. And the Vettori brothers made sure that Machiavelli got out of his jail, though he had been condemned to a life sentence. This is something that not many people remember. And it was thanks to the direct intervention of Francesco and Paolo, that he got out scot-free from this situation. But he was jobless, and therefore he had to sort of reapply for a job through the writing of that book that we mentioned earlier, The Prince. Now, this letter is written 3 months after the election of Leo X. And what is very interesting here is that it gives us a sort of internal perception. So I should mention that Vettori was in Rome at this point because he had been sent there as the ambassador of the Florentine Republic, but now under Medici guidance. And he was sent there before the election of Leo. And so now he found himself to be the Florentine ambassador in Rome while the Pope was a Florentine. And so he had a pretty cozy but almost useless job. And he says that the Medici are pretty much snubbing him. And he adds that they basically, the Medici are treating everyone like shit. This is pretty much what he's saying. That they're so arrogant, and they're so self-important, and they are important, but they're also very, very dismissive. So while the brother is sort of pushing to sort of get some favors from his brother, his bigger brother in Rome. Francesco is sort of brushing him off and saying, I can't do much because they really don't listen to me, but they don't really listen to anyone. And then he mentions the Archbishop of Florence, Giulio de Medici, who had recently become Archbishop after the sudden and somewhat suspicious death of Cosimo de' Pazzi, one of our young fellows, and also social media manager Emma Iadanza is working on Cosimo de' Pazzi, so I won't steal the subject from her, but I just want to mention that he is there. And so there is a rumor already in June of 1513 that Giulio will soon become a cardinal, although this is not yet sure, and in fact it will become true in September of that very year. Then we go on, and we have a sort of an kind of an insight in the Francesco's private life. As you saw, Francesco had been sent for almost 2 years and a half, first in Germany and then in Flanders, then returned, then were sent out to Rome for another 2 or 3 years, it will turn out. And so his wife, Maddalena Capponi, is rightfully complaining because of his long absence. And so he writes this pleading letter to her, saying that he's trying his best to convince the government to let him come home, but they simply wouldn't let him go. And he can't wait to go back to Florence, and he even would go on foot to their villa outside of Florence because he's sick of being, he's really homesick. But all this is sort of private information. But that line that that are emphasized in yellow is an incredibly important testimony of what he says. I'm going to translate. I hear what you say about Lorenzo de Medici. Lorenzo is the young Turk to whom, by the way, Machiavelli will dedicate his book, The Prince. He is very young, he says, and he has nobody that would correct him. And it is to be hoped that with time he will change his ways. Now, this is at a time when Lorenzo is the sort of chosen heir to the Medici power in Florence. And he is very young, and he is very arrogant, and he's making mistakes. And unfortunately, we don't have the letter that Maddalena wrote to Francesco. But clearly, Francesco is responding to a critique that comes from, the people in Florence that are very unhappy about having such an immature and inexperienced leader, and he's sort of trying very kind of timidly to defend him. And this is at the same time when Machiavelli is writing and finishing to write The Prince, and also trying to endear himself to the Medici. So I won't get into more analysis of this, but I think you begin to see why these letters become a sort of an appendix, a very interesting and transversal, oblique, diagonal appendix to the edition of Machiavelli's letters. And we'll get much more of this. Now, this is one of the big sort of discoveries that come through this archive. And so I have also the chance to introduce to you the character of Paolo, about whom I have said not much so far. So Paolo was the younger brother, and as it often happens with number two, he was a lot more outgoing, and I would say also much more active and courageous than Francesco. Francesco said about himself, as you'll see, that he was very shy and afraid of doing things. Paolo wasn't. Paolo, in fact, had been personally involved in the bloodless return of the Medici in September 1512. He had been the person who had kept secret exchanges between the then exiled Medici and the sort of the frangia, the dissenting citizens who wanted the Medici back. And as a result, he had been awarded several jobs, including treasurer of the city of Florence, maggiordomo of the house of Giuliano de' Medici. And when Giuliano had died in February 1516, also he had been given the major job of admiral of the papal fleet. Now, in that book that I showed you before and elsewhere, with the help of my friend Andrea Guidi, we discovered that Machiavelli, during the year 1516, had not been scratching his lice, as he writes himself in Sant'Andrea in Percussine, but in fact he was involved in a punitive expedition against a corsair in the north of Africa that was bothering everyone in the Mediterranean. And this mission was conducted by the admiral of the papal fleet, Paolo Vettori, with the help of Machiavelli. So there is a whole sort of novel of Machiavelli, sort of maritime Machiavelli, that until now was completely unknown. And this much we had figured, but we didn't know the extent to which Machiavelli's role was important. In fact, the editor, the coordinator of the edition, had forced us to kind of tone down our enthusiasm and say, no, but you don't have really proof that Machiavelli was seriously involved in operations, where it turns out he really was, because this other letter in Latin, written by Francesco, who at this point is ambassador for the Florentines in France. He writes that he has been told that his good old friend Niccolao Machiavellum was sent to Pope Leo X to discuss the fate of the triremes, so the galleys that have been used to punish this corsair. By the way, the corsair escaped. They destroyed his base in Tunis, but as a vengeance, he went to the coast of Italy and he nearly managed to actually kidnap the Pope himself. This is a whole incredible story. One day I'll have to tell in full detail. But what interests us here is the fact that Machiavelli, in a year where every scholar of Machiavelli, and especially those who hold fast the belief that Machiavelli was never involved with Medici service, which to me is absurd, but is still something that many people keep repeating. Well, it turns out he was talking to the Pope about what to do about the papal galleys. So this is sort of a small but big revolution in Machiavelli's studies. And this is all thanks to this unknown letter written by Francesco to his brother's son, Piero di Paolo. I'll skip ahead because I have more things to say, and the time is limited. This is the original letter. As you can see, the very difficult writing by Francesco Vettori in Latin, and this is the original. I also want to say that some of the Vettori letters ended up in unthinkable places. This particular one was written by the datary Giberti to Paolo Vettori. Again, Paolo is still in the same role as admiral. And what is interesting here is that it mentions the Fiumara. And again, this is a small detail, but this was about the sort of the parking of the galleys during a certain time. And it turns out that the Fiumara is Fiumicino, and in this edition, we were again sort of coaxed to say that if this Fiumara was in Tuscany, it turns out it was near Rome. Anyway, I could say a lot more about this naval business, but I want to get to more earthly business as well. As you can see, Vettori's letters, these are two letters to Machiavelli's brother-in-law, Francesco del Nero, give us a lot of information about Machiavelli's activities. So they're indirect correspondence, carteggio indiretto, but they tell us about Machiavelli's writing against religion, about his writing comedies, and about the stuff that the Pope says about him. This is already in the year 1524, 1525, when things are getting really hot in Italy. And what's happening is that in February 1525, and in a couple of months, we'll be celebrating the 500th anniversary. The Battle of Pavia happens. Battle of Pavia is a crushing defeat of the French army trying to regain the control of Milan in the north of Italy. And as a result of this defeat, the King of France himself, Francis I, is captured by his worst enemy, Charles V, and is held captive for about a year. And this sort of changes the whole political balance. And Machiavelli, Vettori, and Clement VII, who were very much on the French side, find themselves completely sort of thrown off balance. So thanks to these letters, we can detail, and again, I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but I want to just give you some highlights here. We know that, for instance, Francesco is writing to Paolo and says that Mr. Jacopo Salviati, a close relative of the Pope, says about him, about Francesco himself, that he is timid. And Francesco admits that he is not wrong to say that, but he also adds that if Salviati were in Florence and not in Rome, and he happens to be, he would see many more dangers, and he would understand why it's not a good thing. And this is a sentence that could be written by Machiavelli. Non so come s'abbia reputazione quello a chi è messo ogni giorno una taglia. Is saying that keeping a state, losing your reputation is impossible. And he is talking about the Medici, who are increasingly unpopular within Florence, and they're not considered strong enough leaders to keep the city together in these hard times. And this is from somebody who's not an anti-Medici character, but is simply observing with great realism the situation, the evolving situation. And then another mention of Machiavelli, still unknown so far, in which he mentions the fact that even Machiavelli is talking to Salviati, trying to put some sense into his head. Now, unfortunately, this is the letter. As you see, you can see the ink is a bit faded and the hand is terrible, but I'm making my way through these documents. And what is interesting here is we learn about the lost letter, whose content is evoked by Vettori, which is connected to the fact that Salviati himself, having received this letter, writes then to his son, Cardinal Giovanni Salviati, and suggests Machiavelli as the secretary of the mission that the same cardinal will be heading to in Spain. at the court of Charles V. This job won't be given to him because the Pope will oppose himself. He wants actually Machiavelli closer to him, but it just gives you a sense how deeply involved Machiavelli was in the government of Rome and Florence at this very tense time. Machiavelli, in fact, goes to Rome, delivers and reads out loud to the Pope the preface to the work that he has finished writing, the Florentine histories, dedicated to Clement VII. He's paid handsomely 100 ducats for this job, and then he returns, but doesn't return directly to Rome because the Pope gives him the job of going and talking to the president of Romagna, that is the historian, but not yet historian back then, quite an engaged politician, Guicciardini. And again, I'm skipping a lot of things, and this letter too is unknown and is in the hands of this antiquarian, and I will publish it as well. So why are these letters interesting besides the sort of personal interaction between the actors? Because Francesco shows himself to be more Machiavellian than Machiavelli in many ways, and he is really a realist in which in the sense that he foresees that the war that the Pope and his pro-French allies, including Mr. Ghiberti, we mentioned before, are engaging is going to end very badly. And he says, for instance, in one of his letters to his brother, that he's not a hawk, he's not into pigliare la guerra, but not because he's a pacifist, it's because he thinks that if you engage in war, you should have a good chance to win it. And to him, it's absolutely clear that going against Charles V, the man on whose empire the sun never sets, is a very bad idea. And he also pushes this argument to the point of saying that people are beginning to talk loudly against the Pope's policies and this sort of recklessness that is leading the Pope to go up against the Emperor. And then he writes things that he shouldn't be writing to his brother because the letters could be intercepted. In fact, one of these letters in which he said things pretty harsh about the Pope was shown to the Pope himself, and then, funny enough, he says, intendo mostrasti la mia lettera al Papa. I heard that you showed him the letter that you were not supposed to show him, but I believe that he couldn't read it. You saw the hand of Vettori, and it's possible that he couldn't actually make sense of those garbled signs, but the letter's content was extremely critical of the very Pope to whom the letter was shown, and he actually had it in his own hands. And so at the same time, Vettori comments on the hawks of the government, including a guy called Roberto Acciaioli, who will be sent as ambassador to France to push the French to support the Pope. But in fact, the French will talk a lot, but do very little to help. I'm going to rush through the end of this quickly so that we can possibly have some discussions, because I understand that I'm giving you a lot of information and this requires a lot of background knowledge as well, but hopefully I'm making myself clear, at least in the sort of highlights and the sort of general argument I'm trying to bring. Just very recently, a couple of weeks ago, I came across an autograph minute is spread in one of these impossibly miscellaneous funds of the Archivio di Stato in Florence. And the letter is unmistakably written by Francesco Vettori, but it's written at a date that is extremely significant. Between the 29 sorry, the 19th and 21st of May, 1527. This is not just after the terrible sack of Rome, which was exactly the kind of comeuppance that Vettori had been prophesizing for months, if not years, to the Pope, and it came to him in the harshest way. So the excidio di Roma, the extermination of Rome, that's the sack of Rome is referring to. But he's also referring to a much more local and important to him event, which is the event of the second expulsion of the Medici, which happened thanks to the support of Francesco himself. And it was a bloodless expulsion in which people like Filippo Strozzi and Francesco del Nero, very close to Machiavelli, were involved as well. And the expulsion happened because they felt that they were in danger. And at the time, the Pope had lost all his power, being basically captive to the Landsknecht inside of Rome. This letter is very long and extremely important because Vettori doesn't simply renegade sort of his faith into the Medici, but he says that the whole policy against Charles V was wrong, and he's writing to the ambassador in Spain at the court of Charles V to please make understand to Sua Maestà that the Florentine didn't mean any harm to the emperor, but in fact were forced by the Pope to go against them. Of course, this won't do much good, neither to Florence nor to Vettori, but this shows where he really stood in terms of political beliefs. Machiavelli died exactly a week after the writing of that letter, and he was never reinstated in the Republican government because the Republicans didn't actually trust him at that point. He had gone all the way to the Medici. And I just want to give you another couple of snippets from this archive to the benefits of the art historians that might be listening. You should know that one of these letters from a minor family member mentions the fact that Michelangelo was consulted on the building of the Vettori Palace. This is at the height of the power of the family in 1520. It is also the time when Michelangelo was in Florence, and he was asked to give his opinion and his project on the facciata, the facade of San Lorenzo. At the same time, he was asked to be involved in the building and fixing of the Palazzo Vettori, just to give you a sense of how important this family was. And then this other letter is written by Francesco at a time when he also had realized that the second floor and he mentions Machiavelli family members as well. And what's important here is the letter is there's few letters addressed to Piero Vettori, the man who then became very famous in Europe for being one of the greatest humanist and Greek scholars. I think if Davide Baldi is listening to us, he will be happy to know that these letters are written to his dear Piero Vettori, but these are all political stuff. And this is a time when Francesco is trying to justify the fact that he can't return promptly to Florence. And I want to just attract your attention to the very last sentence of this letter, because the Florentines are accusing him of not being faithful, loyal to his fatherland, to Florence. And he replies by saying instead, that we may have lost any authority or grace in the eyes of the Republican government at the time. But if he had left any of these qualities, he would spend them only in the benefit of his fatherland of Florence. This might be rhetoric, but not so much, truly, because he thinks that nobody is, in fact, has ever loved Florence more than himself. So this is a sentence, interesting enough, that echoes the last letter that Vettori wrote to Machiavelli, in which he says, "Amo la patria mia and amo Messer Guicciardini." And la patria, again, is not Italy, is Florence. So on this note, I will end my presentation, and hopefully there will be some questions that I can relate to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcello Simonetta, for sharing your work with us and for all the ad hoc translations of all the documents that you showed today. Really impressive work. Congratulations to you. And at this moment, our Q&A session is now open. So please write your questions in the Q&A box so that I can read them to Marcello while we still have him. But I'm going to start with my own questions if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Thank you. So how do you think that these correspondence, these letters, can shed light on Machiavelli's strategies for navigating both the political networks, both inside and outside of Florence, and in the context of his relations with both the Vettori brothers and the Medici? Sorry, this is a long question. So in what ways do you think that the correspondence and the letters can enlighten us about his strategies in navigating the political networks?
Well, first of all, what I'm trying to do is to show that Machiavelli is not an island, as not a sort of, often he's portrayed as this isolated genius. That's why I chose this half ironic title, the Machiavelli's genial, brilliant friends. It's not that way. Machiavelli was smart, but there were actually people around him, and I keep saying this, that were politically smarter than him at the time. And definitely the Vettori brothers, and we can also mention the Guicciardini brothers, who survived, unlike Machiavelli, many political shocks and aftershocks. So Machiavelli, in many ways, was the least Machiavellian of them all. And so just by understanding that, we understand a lot of other things, and we also understand that we are called the Medici Archive Project, and often the Medici are perceived that we are going to have I think a whole conference in January about the lies, the wonderfully legendary and crazy histories built around them. But one sort of major I don't want to call it lie, but belief, almost dogma, is that the Medici are this kind of rock solid dynasty that people may try to kill them, may try to conspire against them, but they never fail. Especially the myth of Cosimo the First and so on. And we have to understand that the building of Cosimo was a nobody in terms of dynasty. He was from the secondary branch of the family, and he used to his advantage the great legacy, but he also built that legacy coming back a few generations before from the other branch to justify his own power. So it's a very complicated game, and the history of Florence up to the 1530s is a history of ups and downs, of republics kicking out the Medici twice and making them then return with a vengeance. And eventually they will prevail, but it's not a straight line. History is not black and white. And so in all that, understanding Machiavelli's positions and not being dogmatic about them, to me is crucial. And I recently wrote a review of a book that I consider very silly, that tries to show that Machiavelli, no, my God, he would never serve the Medici, he would never bow to them because he was such a hard, pure Republican. I'm sorry, it's bullshit. It's not the way you do history. You have to understand all the complexities of history, and thinking in this completely dogmatic 20th century terms, as if there was a Medici party and you have to have a tessera del partito, adhere. That's actually the expression that these people use, as if you were, on one end, on the other, all the time is the same. It's not. So in all this, I think that this incredibly rich trove of documents shows us all the backstage. Just to give you one example, the character I mentioned the least in this talk, this Giovanni, was as I said, the mercantile-minded, the sort of business-minded guy. And guess what? The Vettori owned a mine of iron, and iron meant cannonballs. And there's a whole story that I don't have the time to tell, but I will tell it in my book. I'm planning to write a whole book publishing as many of these letters as I can. Turns out that Giovanni was selling the cannonballs to his brother Paolo, who was then using them on the fleet of the Pope. So on the one hand, it looked like they were serving, Florence and serving the Pope. On the other, were self-serving. They were making lots of money, so they were like doing, dirty deals. So obviously and this is all done very quietly and very kind of shadily. And so Machiavelli looks like a totally naive character compared to these things. That's what's fascinating to me. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but
you did. Yes, very comprehensive. Thank you. Yeah, we do have two questions in the Q&A, and we do have about 3 minutes, but
right.
so we'll do our best. So the first is by Stephen. Thank you very much for your presentation. How much do you get a sense of the humanity of the characters included in these archives? Are there any details about personalities or characteristics that caught your eyes? Thank you.
Well, since I have little time, I will simply say yes, indeed. And the whole point of my writing, I write narrative nonfiction, and I chose that style because I think that humanity and the peculiarities of these individuals tells us a lot about who they were and how they thought. So I never sort of distinguish and disentangle their humanity from their intellectual and theories. So the answer is emphatically yes, but I don't have the time to elaborate on that.
Perfect. And if there are any follow-up questions, I can also connect you to Marcello Simonetta. And the last question is by Christine Phillips. Good to see you. And this has been fascinating. I second that. One question I have regards Francesco's letter of 1524 to Francesco de Nero about the opinions of Machiavelli e la sua storia. Does Storia here refer to Machiavelli's tribulations, to the Discorsi, or most significantly to Il Principe?
And, no, it's about the Florentine histories. It's the time, and this is Francesco del Nero, who was Machiavelli's brother-in-law, was also the head of the studio di Pisa, so basically like the treasurer of the university, and he was the one who was paying his brother-in-law to write the Florentine history. In fact, he had managed to raise his Machiavelli's own salary. So, and it was about the official writing, and the work of writing the histories had been given earlier by other chancellors of Florence, such as Bracciolini or Bruni. So Machiavelli was very much in that tradition, and his story in that case is the book that eventually will be given to Pope Clement VII.
Perfect. There is a second part to this question. I would like to hear more about the matter of Corsair. Okay, yeah, so Christine is responding to you. Do we know the name of the Corsair, the one based in Tunis?
Yes, his name was Turkoglu. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing him correctly, but he was, as you guessed from the name, it was Turkish, and he was the terror of the Mediterranean at the time. And I have a whole story about him. I can tell, but I hope Christian comes soon to Florence so that I can tell it to her in person because I'm afraid we're running out of time here.
Yes, and I'm sharing your email here with our audience for any follow-up questions, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Okay, perfect. So now everybody can reach out to Marcello, who has generously, again, accepted to answer any follow-up questions. But for now, because I know it's midnight for you, thank you so much again for joining us from Florence, beautiful Florence. And thank you again so much for sharing your work with us. And we cannot wait to see the published book with all the letters and your discoveries, hopefully soon.
It's been a pleasure as usual, and I thank you for the invitation.
Of course, my honor. Thank you so much, everyone. Please join us again next week for the last MAP Forum of 2024. We will have a special event with Medici Archive Project's interns next week. So it's going to be a celebration. So hope to see you again soon with the same link, same time will work. Thank you so much. Good night, Marcello.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte. Bye-bye.